And oddly, the tribe had no idea anything like this was occurring. It was our neighbors. It was 14 different environmental groups were already gearing up to battle, and the tribe came late to the party. All of the way through from the very beginning, way back when the slaughter was on nationally, there always have been some just regular citizens who were offended and protested and stood against the government to defend against slavery, to defend against the slaughter of Indians. It's never been all of the white people involved in the genocide. There always have been some people of good conscience and good sense that attempted to protect. And, you know, without all of the support groups, Alcatraz wouldn't have happened, DAPL wouldn't have happened, our fishing rights wouldn't have happened, we wouldn't have gotten our property back, the hospital property, if people hadn't stood with us. You know, we've never done anything alone or entirely on our own. And so, you know, when you talk about maintaining order, there is no order. There is never going to be order. There always is going to be dissension. There always is going to be violence, but the minority people never will stand alone. And we do say the people united, the people united.
Will never be defeated.
The people united.
Will never be defeated.
Thank you. I was at the tribe and there were a whole bunch of Puyallups that were rallying, and I drove up to them and I yelled, "The people united," and they all waved at me. So we be slipping. Something's not working here. So that's my phone again. I've got to learn to turn
It
it
happens
off.
every time. I turn my
So does anyone have a question I actually could answer? This young lady. I think it's the young lady. This
My question is, come up because just if you have questions, you can come up, or I can bring the mic over.
my question just follows. So I first heard about like the fishing wars whenever I was at DAPL from my uncle Robert. He said Robert Eater when he was
Oh, that's your uncle?
yeah, when he was I actually learned how to fire keep, and he taught me a lot about the history of this place up here. So he mentioned a lot about the bridge burning and the stuff that happened when he was young. He was just a young boy, maybe 14,
Well, your
15.
Uncle Joe was my close friend.
Really?
Yeah, my traveling buddy.
I guess my question follows the line of like hearing about those stories about the fishing wars and how active this area was. Bringing like the spirit of that, what advice would you give for those of us who are young and have seen, seen how intense things can get, where we need to bring the intensity now as the younger generation to, likening things to DAPL in the fishing wars and what we can do right now.
I did a speech at Idle No More up in Seattle, And what I said is, you know, we have to shout. We have to keep shouting. You know, we can't be quiet. There are rallies going on right now. Right now, it really is PSELNG. You know, participation in all of that is very important. And you know, when it's time, you'll know. You know, if all you have is your body to put on the line, that's what you'll do. You'll know when it's time. But meanwhile, you know, you have to stay clean. You have to be healthy. You have to uphold the principles of being a good Indian. You know, you have to work and be helpful and learn. For Indian people, learning isn't something you do for 8 years or 12 years or 16 years. Learning is a lifetime activity. Kelly Kavanaugh and Ella Aquino were in their 80s when computers first came out, and they were in computer classes because learning is a lifetime activity for Indians. And so if you're here, you're doing exactly the right thing. That's what you're supposed to be doing. And when it comes down, you'll be ready. Good question.
I'd just like to add and follow up on something Ramona said about allies. You need to develop those allies. And one of the ways I think it works is one, as Ramona said, knowing who you are, knowing your culture, knowing your history, and knowing your stuff, and consistently learning your stuff. And then working with your allies to help them understand so they can be stronger. And there's a book called Who Speaks for Wolf. Are you guys at all familiar with that? It's a children's story. But when you're not in the room and we can't be everywhere, who speaks on our behalf? It's those allies. And if we've trained them right, they know what to say to help us. And Ramona's right, we wouldn't have survived without allies throughout history, throughout the reservation periods, throughout the genocide periods. We didn't have some friends out there and friends in Congress and other places. You know, we might not be sitting here. So I think it's really important, and the advantage that gives you, if you know your own culture and you know who you are and your history, and you learn the dominant culture and what they expect and how they behave, you've got an advantage because you've got two cultures behind you then. They've only got one. So it makes you move forward.
Do we have another good question? No? Okay, Lucky.
So, I was wondering if you could give some thoughts in how the evolution of technology and activism, or in different protests or different movements, how technology is now versus then, or any thoughts in that?
Can you start over?
If I could have any thoughts on technology now in activism versus technology then?
Oh, yeah.
Tecumseh. If we had technology in Tecumseh's time, the world might look real different.
I really love Tecumseh. He stood in front of the American government and said, "I speak for all the Indians." And you know what, you guys? There are gonna be times when you'll find yourself speaking And you know there's not one sane Indian that would disagree with you. I mean, there will be times in your life when you truly are speaking for all the Indians. But, you know, we had to arrange invasions, occupations, riots, rallies, gatherings, escapes. No cell phones. There was no cell phones. Most of us didn't even have landlines. A lot of us didn't have cars that ran. But we were able to do all of that. And you know, Joaquin, I don't know how in the hell we did it. Really,
Piled in one car.
Well, that's true.
something like that. You know, how many of you know where Daybreak Star is? Okay. Well, Daybreak Star, you know, we got it through a series of invasions. And it was all people talking to people. A lot of people catching the money bus. And, you know, a lot of people didn't have any phones. And so I was lost. I was always lost. I was lost and I was driving around looking for the Indians because we were supposed to be there. And are there any people from Nez Perce here?
Somewhere. There's two. My husband's in this Pierce.
Okay. Well, there was a Marty Arthur and a girl named Edna Paisano, something like that. And I had picked them up, they were riding with me, and I felt really stupid because I didn't even know where the invasion was. But if we tried to go to a riot and couldn't find it, So I'm driving down the road by Fort Lawton, and I look down a side road, and there's Bernie White Bear and Bob Sataikum and a whole bunch of other people, and they're all running, carrying a teepee and carrying teepee poles. They're running up toward the fort, and I'm driving by the fort, and I look and it's all razor wire at the top of this high, what kind of a fence?
Chain link, yeah.
Yeah. Cyclone.
Yeah.
Cyclone fence. And I could see they weren't going to be able to get over it. And so I just drove up by it, hopped out of my car so they could climb on it and get over. Now, if we had had cell phones, I'll bet we couldn't have done that. Because we would have been someplace, we would have been where we should have been instead of where we were supposed to be. Technology was way different. All of the press stuff, I typed on a little portable manual typewriter. If we wanted to get the word out, we had to use mimeographs. Do any of you know what a mimeograph is?
Ditto machine. Yeah, ditto.
We never called them that. It's a new one. But yeah, the technology, just having vehicles that run and having landlines and having cell phones and being able to copy things. You know, Xerox was a real luxury back then. Now everybody's printer can make copies. And computers, being able to get the word clear across country instantly. Yeah, it's hugely different. I like that question. because we were really just thinking about that. But how in the hell did we do it?
Sometimes you get to a place and you finally think you've arrived and you found out it was yesterday. Because the rumor didn't reach you in time, and that happened.
Yeah, it did. Anybody else, or are y'all still thinking? Okay.
So first, I wanted to thank you for everything you've done in Indian country. And I also wanted to thank you for my grandmother, Skigla. I guess my question would be, in a democratic, sovereign nation, how do we continue to uphold and bring in our history into tribal law?
Wow. I think all of the tribes really try. I see that everywhere, that in the courts they try to have a council of elders that can hear, and if they can't decide, at least they can make recommendations. I see all of the tribes trying to do that, but it's difficult because you have so many layers of law. And just even our Indian Child Welfare Act, which we really did start right here. And we really started it right at Puyallup. And it was just a clink-a-dink. I had a tiny little office in our tribe cemetery, and the state was getting the title to what had been our Indian hospital grounds. And so the regional administrator was right across the fence, and there happened to be a gate. And I think that accidental gate was the only reason that we were able to establish a flow. And when we pushed for the Indian Child Welfare Act, we tried to respect our traditions and religions, and it was so hard. You know, we never leave a baby or a child under 8 sleeping in a room by themselves. We don't do that because their spirit is loose in their body. And if any spirits come through and find them alone, they might say, oh, look, a baby, and nobody even wants it. And that's called SIDS. And so we never leave babies alone in a room. But once we started setting up our own child placing agencies, they have rules about who can sleep in the same rooms. And so the fight was on. You know, the fight was on to defend our beliefs and traditions and religions. And that, if you have an itty-bitty little pool for goldfish in your yard, it's gotta be fenced. Well, what do you think that means if you happen to be an Indian family and you live by the river? Can you fence a whole river? No, you can't. Can you? No, you can't. And so each and every family that we licensed, there'd be a fight about something. I was doing, I'll say her name, Isabel Warpus up Lummi Land. Anybody from Lummi? What? Oh, there's a little hand back there. Do you know Isabel Warpus, or did you know her? Heard the name? Oh, well, anyway, she was amazing. She she had a whole bunch of kids that she was raising, and she needed a foster license to be able to legally keep them. And actually, she could even be paid for, have some dollars to help support them. So anyway, she applied for a license. And I told her, I can tell the difference between a dirty home and the disorder that comes with actually living there. And I said, if you're carving a canoe in your living room, don't move it because I'm coming. Oh, there goes my grandson. He's gonna come here in a couple of years. Okay, now you have to. Because I promised. So I said, if you're carving a canoe, don't put it away because of me. So I get up there, and they've got sawhorses in the living room, and they're carving big masks. Big raven and eagle masks. Big masks. And hanging off the walls is all kind of roots and bark and stuff, because she's a pretty famous basket weaver. So now we get into the forms, and she fills out criminal history. And she's got a conviction. Feathers. She's been convicted of feathers. What? She said she was doing the hats for Smokehouse, and she had all the eagle feathers, and she got raided. They come in, they took all the feathers, they cited her, they charged her, they dragged her to court, they convicted her of feathers. U.S. Fish Wildlife. And so now I'm arguing with the state about a feather conviction. In our rules and policies, she's cool. In the state's rules and policies, she is not cool. And so the fight was on. And I did get her license. And I also did get the quadriplegic who drove a license. And he actually was, he worked on a CPS hotline at the state when the crazy bitch of a licenser said, well, how does he drive? I said, well, he works right by you. Why don't you go get a ride? She just signed off on it. So, see, it isn't, they're not just hard on us. They're hard on everybody. And those are my best examples of the endless struggle for us to stick with our beliefs in a very hostile system. But we do it. But everybody's got to be prepared for that fight. You know, don't just accept no as an answer in your future lives as workers and administrators. You know, be prepared to take a stand. You know, that's where the battle actually is, in just day-to-day living. Sure you can.
Okay, so Ramona did step one, and she did all that hard work of battling the state. She also licensed me for 2 foster kids that got pulled out of Portland drug house. And she fought those battles against culturally appropriate homes in the state regulations. So there's a step 2 and there's a step 3. So Ramona did that for years, and she was the only one doing that for years. But the tribes wanted their own regulations and their own cultural values to be recognized by the state. So that was battle 2. Can't remember the legislation that finally happened, but there was a final agreement, and I know you were at least advising in part of that, where we sat in a room with attorneys on the states and the tribe side and tribal representatives of Indian child welfare, and we said, you need to recognize tribal licensing agencies, such as what Ramona was doing. And that probably took a year or 2. I was working at Suquamish at that time when we were fighting that. And we finally came to that, where they said, okay, we will recognize tribal licensing agencies for tribal homes, and you can draw up your own regulations as long as they aren't, so they still in the parental role, said as long as they aren't dangerous. Okay, cool. Heard that before.
You just can't wait to endanger our children.
Yes, that's exactly what we want to do. We want to endanger the kids. So that got recognized. So that was step 2. But as Ramona mentioned, families were still not being paid state funds. These kids are eligible for foster care. The parents, the people that were taking care of them, were eligible to receive payment. So then the third step was we go to the legislature with a bill saying you recognize these licensing agencies. Now you need to recognize the homes and pay the foster parents out of our tax monies, right? And nobody really knew what this was going to cost. And I remember my testimony was, well, these kids are eligible just like any other kid in the system for getting payments to take care of them. If we pass that bill, so now they can get the money, but I got called on the carpet because it ended up costing a small fortune. Because we do have a lot of kids in foster care, we did back then, and the state had no idea how many homes had foster kids in them, and some of them were relative homes, this is natural, but they were eligible. And so my only argument is why would you deny these families, these children, the support that every other child in the state of Washington gets? And they really couldn't argue with me, even though they were mad at me and the rest of us that had pushed that bill through. So without pioneers, without fighters like Ramona and others, we wouldn't have gotten to step 2 or step 3. And see, Ramona's really only a year or so older than me, but I learned a lot from her.
I'm older than her.
Maybe.
Oh, you kids. Okay.
I won't use the mic, but just based like you said, I'll use it.
The young man to the left.
So, like, you don't get to be the ages y'all are without your relatives, and I guess just in line with kind of paper I'm working on, like, thinking about, like, what we would call new nowadays, but maybe not so new. Have you found yourself in a place where you were making relatives that you didn't think you did, or, like, what's your favorite way to meet new people or form new relations that you can trust and that you rely upon? You know, these can be just anything from like family gatherings to like a favorite story about a time when that you can think of where you're like, wow, I really walked away like feeling good about the people I met there, or, you know, feeling supported in that way.
They were interviewing me, and they asked me to tell them what I thought of Puget Sound Energy. And I said, I love them. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have met all of these terrific people I get to hang with. It's a whole new world of very smart, high energy, caring active, wonderful people. Well, Carol is one of them. She's to Tacoma 350, which is one of the environmental ecology. I used to call them eco-terrorists, but I quit that recently, realizing that I was becoming one of them. So that's one of the ways I've been meeting people, is actually through these different movements. But Facebook really tightens up some relationships. Yes.
We have a student in the back who has a question.
Oh, okay. A bashful student?
No, I was just getting there and Toby reaching out for me. I just had a question from Michelle. You were talking about when the tribes became involved in what you were just talking about. When did that happen? What year was that? About.
All right, the first, when we went for getting recognition of tribal licensing agencies, I was still at Suquamish, so that would have been the early 80s, I believe, maybe 84, 5, somewhere in there.
I was just curious. I wanted to take you both to, I was adopted and was raised in a white home in 1974. And so it was before the new Child Welfare Act.
Yeah.
And I spent a life trying to reconnect with my culture, my family. I did meet my family eventually, but it's been a life journey, and the work that you guys have done is just amazing to me. Later in life, I took my Native nephews and nieces into my home because I didn't want them raised in a non-Native home. And your work has made that possible, so thank you.
Did I open your adoption?
Ramona taught me how to track down families of people who had been adopted outside of their tribes, and how to sometimes reunite those people. And it wasn't always, it wasn't always the dominant cultural laws that we were following.
That's good. We're gonna put it.
But it was always good. It was a win-win, because if you met your bio family and they were a bunch of jerks and creeps, then you could go, yay, I got away. And if they were wonderful, then you had a new circle of friends and family for the rest of your life. So it was always good. I opened about 3.
Well, there's an important law that was created about me being able to go to the Bureau of Indian Affairs and opening my actual adoption record so I can see who my birth parents